Welcome, everyone, to the Mindful Momentum podcast. I'm so happy that you're here today. I am Robin Todd, your host, and I am so grateful and honored to have Dr. John Gaal. Is that how you pronounce it? I should have
That
asked you
is
before we
correct.
started. Okay.
You
Um,
win the prize.
Very good. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Gaal. He is the director of the Missouri Works Initiatives Worker Wellness Program for the Missouri AFL-CIO. What's that stand for?
The Missouri AFL-CIO is the American Federation of Labor and Congress Industrial Organizations. So
There we
that's
go.
that's like that's the umbrella group for most unions for in all four corners of the state.
Excellent. Thank you. Previously, he served as the Director of Training and Workforce Development for the St. Louis, Kansas City Carpenters Regional Council. With over 40 years in the labor movement, he holds advanced degrees in construction management, architecture, international business, and organizational leadership, along with postdoctoral studies at Harvard and the University of Florida. Impressive. A Fulbright scholar and published expert in workforce development and worker wellness, he actively serves on multiple advisory boards. Dr. Gall has been married for 40 years, has four children, and teaches as an adjunct professor at Webster University. So, welcome, Dr. Gall. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited about our conversation. I know we kind of started chit-chatting a little bit before we started recording, and we have lots to talk about and lots to share with our common passion with mental health in the construction industry. So, tell us just a little bit about your background. I know that certainly highlighted a little bit about it, but how you have the work that you've been doing and how you see mental health in this industry, where it came, where it is.
Sure.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you and with your audience. And it's an honor and a pleasure. As you said, these are topics that you and I are both passionate about. So you'll probably have to cut me off because I could talk forever, as most people will indicate if you know me. So anyway, yeah, I would say that this is not something that just came about because of some bad incident or something along those lines. No, as a matter of fact, 20 plus years ago in 2004, uh, doctors from Washington University in St. Louis, their School of Medicine, came to me and asked, "Hey, would you mind us studying your apprentices?" And I'm like what? And they're like, "Well, you know, we walk out of our offices every day, out of the hospital every day, and almost every day there's one or more cranes going up or up already doing work near to us, on our campus." And we got to thinking that, hey, in order for this to continue and for our work to continue, um, your work has to continue, and it cannot continue unless someone's ensuring that what they know and how they're being trained is effective. Because we have a vested interest to make sure that whether it's 5, 10, 15 years from now, that there are people to do this work for us. I was like, oh, that's an interesting approach. So I said, sure. So they started in what I call the kind of low hanging fruit of slips, trips, and falls. Also, what I refer to as the physical aspects of safety.
Mhm.
Um, well, it was 2004, and everybody knows what happened across the globe 3 years later, right? The global economic, meltdown.
Mhm.
And that's when I started to see, and my instructor started to tell me, hey, we got bigger issues here than slips, trips, and falls. And so some of these, instructors said, keep an eye on some of these apprentices. And so I knew some of them already. And our program at the time was, we were out in 150 apprentices every week, and it rotated, all year round. Um, and so we would see the same apprentice every 3 months, essentially. And so, let's say it was fall. I went up to that person and said, hey, Robin, how you doing? You pull me aside. I said, well, not too good. I just lost my job.
Mhm.
And then, we talk and get him, him or her to the right person, to help them find a new job and see him 3 months later in school again and pull him aside and discreetly say, hey, we talked last time. How are things going? Well, not so good. I just lost my truck. And then, kind of went on every 3 months. The next time I lost my house. The next time I lost my family. I was like, oh, so I went to those research and say, hey, I think we're doing a disservice in these studies. They're like, what do you mean? We got some great data. We've improved some of your safety training. I said, yeah, but you're only looking at one half of the person. And I kind of took a step back and said, what do you mean by that? I said, well, you're looking at the physical aspects of safety, and we're ignoring the mental aspects of safety. So, when our people walk on the job, they can't just leave their personalities at the gate. They've got baggage that they drag on, to those job sites. As much as we can tell them not to drag that back, it is who we are. It's our DNA, and each one of us is different. How something affected you, Robin, it may be the same incident that I experienced, but I'm a male, and I saw it differently, so it didn't affect me. Maybe for the better or worse, right? And so they stepped back and they said, yeah, you know what? We actually have partners up in the University of Iowa that study it, and that's a name for that. And I said, what is it? And they said, it's called total worker health. It looks at the individual from 360 degrees. I said, let's get on it. So we started to move in that direction. We started to make some changes, started adding some questions to surveys that, started to look at some of these issues of, you know, uh, pain, killer misuse and things of that nature. And um, we approached creating some training, but not calling it mental health because of the stigma.
Right. Mhm.
And we did financial literacy,
Yeah.
and it really took off and in a direction we never expected. And that's the funny thing, because we developed it for as an online program. Actually, one of my coordinators down in Cape Girardeau was working on a master's degree in curriculum develop, virtual curriculum, develop and design. And he needed basically whatever they call them, a keystone project or whatever, he said, you got an I said, yeah, I'd love to put an 8-hour financial literacy online. And to Bruce Bird's credit, God rest his soul, he did a fabulous job. We started to get calls, Robin, from journey level workers. So it's designed for apprentices. And they were basically, kind of pinning me against the wall saying, number one, why did it take so long? Number two, what's next? And all that kind of stuff. So, whoa, wait a minute. Let me tell you something. This was not really designed for journey level people. This is for our apprentices. Um, and they're like, you know what? I don't care who it's for. I got to tell you, I hope this is appropriate for your podcast. I'd say, when I can't sleep at 2 in the morning, I sit in my underwear at the computer working on your units and getting it done, and I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. So
Awesome.
that
That's a
gave
great
me,
response. Oh my God.
well, it gave me the blessing to get beyond that stigma of not calling it mental health and calling it square up front mental health. And I would tell them, I said, well, I want to share a secret with you. There's a reason we called it financial literacy, because I firmly believe, and other experts believe, that the root of all evil is money. Because every one of those apprentices I talked to, over the course of that year, every 3 months, it always came back to, if they had money, they might be able to resolve their issue. So financial literacy seemed like a no-brainer. And so anyway, yeah, we were finally able to come out and say, hey, we've been doing this for a year now. We're going to tell you what we've been doing. This is the first step in a direction of what we're going to call mental health.
Mhm.
And we were afraid if we called mental health on day one, it would have scared more people away than it would have brought in under our tent. And now that we've got all these people of all stripes under our tent, let's roll with it. And so that's what we did. So,
Wow.
that really took us into probably the 2012, 13, 14, some, early teens. And
Mhm.
then guess what hit our industry locally? And I'm sad to say this, because too often in most of our lives, nothing becomes important until it hits our dinner table, right?
Right.
And so um, a close colleague of mine. I consider him a dear friend. We went to high school together, year older than me. We ran track together, known him for a long time. And in March of 2016, he lost his son to a opioid overdose. And I was just knocked on my heels when we got to talking about some of the details, because he told me, "Hey, John, my son was 36 years old. He had been dealing with this devil for 18 years." Well, Robin, that's half his life. And I was like, well,
Yeah,
honestly,
it's tough.
this was the first time that I understood
Yeah.
stigma.
Mm.
When somebody who's known you for, close to 40 years can't share an intimate detail like that. Oh, it just, and I'd go home and talk to my family about it. And um, finally went back and I told him, I said, I can't, I'm not the kind of person who would sit back and watch that ship sail by me. And so I told the family, and I said, hey, I'm going to reach out to my friend and see what I can do, to walk beside him. I said, because there can't be anything worse on the face of the earth than losing a child.
No.
And
Well, it sounds like it served as inspiration to you to start
oh, we did,
to
for
continue.
more ways than one.
Mm.
So we went to an opioid conference, workshop, seminar, whatever you want to call it, whether it was for the community, whether it was in the industry, whether it was, wherever, in the workplace, whatever it might have been, every month for the rest of 2016. And Robin, I learned things in there that I couldn't fathom.
Mm.
I couldn't dream up.
Yeah.
And I've got a pretty devious mind. I was on 4 years probation my first month of high school, so
Oh.
was no angel, right? So,
Uh-huh.
but I couldn't even dream of some of these things. These professors were telling us at some of these, presentations, and I'd have to wrap my head around it. I'd go home and share some of those things that really confounded me at dinner. And in fact, at some point, my older son, told his mom, my wife Mary, said, "Mom, you got to get Prada to quit talking about heroin and opioids at the dinner table every night." I said, I'm just fascinated by it. The human psychology of how the brain works, and from the practical aspect, not the theoretical aspect of
Right.
seeing this stuff, and what people do, to continue in that path.
Mhm.
And I thinking myself as a quote unquote normal, rational person, why would somebody do that? Well, I didn't understand all the science behind it yet. And so I learned not to be so judgmental.
Mhm.
And so that was a blessing. And
Wow.
sadly, in March of 2017, 8 years ago to this month, we lost our 24-year-old son to suicide. So, with
I'm
that being
sorry.
said, my thank you. My friend came back to me and said, "Hey, you walked me last year.
Yeah.
It's time for me
To walk with you.
to walk by your side."
Yeah. Mm.
And so by summer, by June, the CDC had published some data that really helped our cause. Because, see, up until that time, Robin, we were getting doors slammed in our face, because we were trying to explain to the industry, that this stuff's really happening out there. Uh, Look at the two of us, it happened to our lives. If it can happen to us, it certainly can happen to you all.
Right.
But there was still some pushback, because a lot of, especially if there are companies that were clearing some of this through their legal departments, and they're like, "Oh, you don't touch it with the 30-foot pole," and all that kind of stuff. And Eventually, when the data came out from the CDC, basically saying that the construction industry as an industrial sector was number one with regards to opioid misuse and number two with regards to suicide, that was our turning point because he had a personal story connected to that data. I had a personal story, and we normally, went in together, to talk about this because honestly, these both come under the umbrella of what I say mental health in the industry. They're just two pillars under there, and you can't talk one without the other.
Right.
So that's a long answer to your question. I hope I've covered it in a very,
Oh,
nutshell
yes. Oh,
approach.
fascinating. Yeah. I think it's true. I see now that we have like the data and the statistics. But when you speak of your personal experience, most of the people that I work with, they are very close to where you are. They know people, they have friends, they have
Yep,
family. They just maybe denied it or they didn't want to know about
yep,
it. People hid it because it was, again, the stigma, the embarrassment, whatever. And, but everybody, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how
yep.
affluent you are, how much money you make, how educated you are. This is everywhere in
Indeed,
every family, in
indeed.
every industry. And the construction industry in particular, those statistics are just so high, uh,
Yep,
which is why we have a lot of work to do, which is why you're
we certainly
dedicating
do.
so much of your life to this and
Yeah,
just
it's the second chapter of my life, right? Because I retired 6 years ago, a little
okay.
over 6 years ago, and um, the Missouri AFL-CIO uh, in March of 21 created a nonprofit arm called the Missouri Works Initiative, and they
Okay.
had a couple several departments under that umbrella, and one of them was pre-apprenticeship training. Um, and so they've expanded a program that was very successful in St. Louis to Kansas City, Columbia, and Springfield. Um, they do a lot of work in the worker dislocated program area for the state, and then
Mhm.
the other pillar under that umbrella was worker wellness, and they came to me and asked me if I would serve as the director.
That's awesome.
And
Well,
so,
and one of the
that's
things that I love that you highlighted was really your emphasis on working with the apprentices, because that's one thing that in my conversations it keeps coming back to. This just needs to be part of the apprenticeship program. It's
yeah,
not optional. We're not going to catch them later because they get busy, life sweeps us off
right.
course. It's how do we start building this into the framework of the program, so then,
Yep.
and I think too, what we anyone who works with young people, I think all agree that our younger demographic is very open to this. They
No doubt.
talk about it more, they look for help more, and whether it's because of their, phones and apps and whatever reason, it doesn't even matter. The fact that they are more willing and open to talk, like taking advantage of that in the apprenticeship program, because eventually all those apprenticeship will be the journeyman, and I
And
mean,
the leadership, right?
and
Yeah.
leadership. Exactly.
Yeah. So I specifically address those pre-apprentice groups every round that they start a new round. Most of them do about 4 rounds a year, and so I try to make it to all of them. And if I can't physically make it, then I do it virtually. Um, and so you touched on a pet peeve of mine, and that is yeah, I couldn't agree with you more that we need to start early and often. This should not be a one and done
Yeah.
and just another box to
Right.
check, say, oh, we did that already.
Right.
So as you mentioned earlier, I spent nearly 40 years of my life in that realm of apprenticeship and workforce development. Um, I was blessed to oversee 6 training programs in the state of Missouri, 2 in Kansas, 1 in Southern Illinois. Um, I sat on the United States Secretary of Labor's advisory committee on apprenticeships from 2003 to 2010. So I knew the inner workings of how some of this stuff works. So the law that covers registered apprenticeship in the United States is actually part of the New Deal, believe it or not. It comes out of what's called the Fitzgerald Act of 1937. And so that basically oversees this regulation called 29 CFR 29. That is that's the structure and the meat on the bones of an apprenticeship, of a registered apprenticeship program under the eyes of the Department of Labor. They have a AAEO piece called 29 CFR 30, which melds nicely with 2929. And so here's what I've been saying for several years now, and that is, listen, 25 years ago, DOL basically told us that we had to have certain things in our apprenticeship programs to get their blessing. And one of those certain things was an OSHA 10 credential. Another of those certain things was first aid CPR. So if we can do those things, and we've been doing it successfully for 25 plus years, why can't we interject an hour for mental health? It's not that big of an ask.
Yeah.
So a year ago, there was actually an effort to update the standards. It since has been poo-pooed, but part of the thing that I had going was a number of people. I got a lot of support on letter writing because it was an open period for rulemaking processes. You could make comments. And we got a lot of support saying, hey, basically what I just said, if we did OSHA and first aid CPR 25 years ago, why can't we do mental health now? So here's what happened. A little over a year ago, towards the beginning of the year, DOL reached out to me and said, we've got a project where we are going to create 2 micro learning units. They do a lot of micro learning type stuff now, learning online, 7 to 10 minutes long type stuff,
Sure, sure.
and we're going to approach mental health in registered apprenticeship program. And we'd like you to consult on it. So I was blessed to consult on the piece for apprentices as well as for the sponsors. So sponsors covers, like the Joint Apprenticeship Committee, the unions, the contractors, and so on and so forth. So I will send you those links if there's a way you can include those. It's free.
So that's required now to be
No, it's
included.
not required,
Oh,
but it's available. So it's a
okay.
first step in the right direction, Robin. So
Absolutely.
so it's huge. So that those went live, I guess probably late summer, early fall, just a few months ago.
Oh,
So
really? Oh my God.
yeah. They're both about 7 to 10 minutes long, and
Okay.
it's got a built-in option to print out as a completion certificate if you successfully complete it. And so I've been pushing that more and more to get, because some of these, let's face it, I talked about the issue of stigma earlier, and let's face it, this is an industry that's still pretty much controlled by males, and the vast majority of them still white. So there's a lot of baggage here, and a lot of things we got to overcome. And sometimes trying to get somebody to take an 8-hour mental health first gate right out of the gate.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to turn people off, go do that.
Right.
Maybe it is a 7 to 10 minute micro learning,
Yes.
course, right? I mean,
Yes.
I always use the example when you were a little kid and your mom or grandma came in with the castor oil bottle. They didn't give you the whole bottle to guzzle. They gave you a teaspoon, right? Because
Yes.
you take a
Yes.
little bit of time. It's nasty, but you know,
Yes.
you finally get used to it, right? And that's the same thing. I'm telling you right now, when we had to do the the OSHA 10, 20 plus years ago, oh my goodness, the contractors are kicking and screaming, the unions are kicking and screaming, the training programs are kicking. Guess what, Robin? After 5 years, no one kicks and screams anymore. It's second nature. Everyone does it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And
And
everybody knows
that's
that.
we are at that tipping point right
Yeah.
now. So
Yeah.
I'll gladly
Uh,
send you those links.
yeah, I would love that. It's funny because I think you're spot on. It's those small baby steps that really start to add up to create that culture shift, right? It's
Right.
not, and I think meeting people where they are,
Yep.
and they are, you're right, they're not ready for this, but they might be ready for this, and
Yep.
that set that 7 to 10 minute. And interestingly, so we call our practices micro practices
No,
for
cool.
micro moments
Cool.
because too, time
Mhm.
is an issue, right, for people. Not only attention, but how much time they have. So making those small bite-sized nuggets can really start
Right.
plant.
And you know what I found is some of the most hard-headed people, once you turn them,
Oh,
they
yeah.
become some of your biggest champions, right?
Yes.
I'm sure you've
Absolutely.
seen that too in your practice.
Absolutely. Well,
Yep.
because we all have struggles. We all
Right.
need a toolbox of things
Yep.
to help us navigate, every day.
Exactly.
Because there's just
And once again, what works for you
yes.
necessarily won't work for me, right?
Absolutely. It's creating a robust toolbox. Yes,
Yep.
absolutely. And I know we talked a little bit before about, our emphasis is being proactive. So really, how do we start to equip these people with these skills before it escalates to a place of crisis?
Right.
And that's a mentality, a mind shift that is difficult because none of,
Yep.
our medical, all kinds
This
of
isn't natural for us. So everything was downstream, right?
everything is
Reactionary. Yeah.
reactionary. Absolutely. So, I mean, I realize this is a different, way to look at it, but of course, we know the research, you and I, which I try and help people see that investment on the front end is going to save them so much um,
Right.
later on. So, tell us a little bit about. Well, so I can't wait to watch
Sure.
and get some of those and preview those. I would love to see. What are some of the
Sure.
topics that you have in that? I'm just curious.
In 7 minutes, we cover a wide
And
range.
how many
There's
of them?
there are just two of these learning units.
Oh,
So
just two.
yes, there's one for the apprentice and there's one for the sponsors. And so
Oh,
the apprentice looks at, I kind of go with the mindset that when it's about me, it's well-being, but when it's about the system or, an organization, that's wellness. So
okay.
apprentice, we look at well-being, whereas we kind of turn it a little bit for the contractors, the unions, and
Okay.
the joint apprenticeship committees. We turn that to more of a higher level wellness.
Okay. Gotcha. So it's just one
One
episode.
each, yeah. Yep,
Okay.
one episode each. Yeah, there's
Okay.
two total. Yeah, it's
Okay.
a
Hey,
start, and
it's a
I know it's not
start.
perfect, but
That's
it's better
absolutely.
than what we had 2 years ago. That's how I look at it.
Absolutely. No, and I will be excited to share this with the
Sure,
organizations that we're talking with because yes, I mean, and what an easy thing for them to do just to pull up and watch,
sure,
absolutely plant those seeds. And hopefully, so tell us a little bit about we talked before we started the podcast, kind of where your new passion lies which is your postvention program. So I
sure.
would love for you to dive into that and how that came about and what is involved in that. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah. So this is something that I have been thinking about ever since my son passed away. Um, but when you Google search, um, you'll find plenty on resources for suicide prevention.
Yeah,
Um, and I'd go as far as saying almost the same for suicide intervention,
sure.
you know, but not so much on suicide postvention.
Yeah.
And then when you start drilling more specific, it even gets more narrow. And yeah, so I people who know me know I've been talking about this for several years, and um, been kind of a gadfly to some of the organizations here in Missouri, and they called me. I guess it was probably late third quarter of last year, and said, "Hey, just want to let you know that if you look at the Missouri Suicide Prevention Network's goals, for their strategic goals, postvention's in there, John." And he said, you might also want to look at the national level, postvention's in there too. And I'm like, wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. So that kind of gave me the green light to, to go to the next level, thinking a little more deeply about it, pulling up, what is available out there. Um, and then, as probably in your life and your listeners' lives, um, things happen and that send you a sign, like,
Mhm.
okay, it's um, you mentioned him earlier, Brendan Anderson. A year ago, he said, John, we've done enough awareness. It's time for action. And he was
Mhm.
talking about suicide prevention.
Yeah.
And I got to that point um, uh, late last summer, early fall, because what happened was from the end of July to the end of October, over those 12 weeks, Robin, I took 8 calls for suicides. And I mean, it's not the first time, but that was a lot. That was a
Yes.
lot. Since my son has died, I probably have taken 8 total. Um, but when I took 8 over that 12-week period, it's like, well, that's a sign. It's
That's
time to,
yeah.
quit the awareness and start the
Talking.
action,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
so I got serious about more research. I reached out to someone I respect highly as a psychologist, Dr. Pamela Hatton over in the London area, um, and started, running some ideas past her. And, she was helping me think more clearly about some aspects of, what I thought, might be appropriate at this, point.
Yeah.
And eventually it was I got a stack of research like that, and you can continue to get a stack like that and still nothing's changing. So I finally said, you know what, it's time to pull together a survey. So I did. And on November the 15th of 2024, I launched it via Survey Monkey. um, I had it out there for 2 weeks. So in the first week of December, I closed it. Robin, it's incredible. I sent 64 out and I got 64 back. And as well as I know,
Yeah.
when especially in the world of marketing,
Right.
when you do a survey, if you get 15%, that's like a home run.
Yes.
So this really, really, just pumped me up to say, my goodness, there's a couple of things going on here. One, people are concerned about this and they wanted to respond to my request with their thoughts. But I think more importantly, this has touched a lot of people's lives, and they see us needing to move in a different direction.
Mhm.
So, you know, one of the first calls I ever got was probably a couple of years after my son had passed away, and it was from a colleague here in St. Louis. And my youngest daughter and my wife and I on a Saturday night about 7 o'clock sat down to watch a movie, and I had my phone on the coffee table, and at 20 after 8 it starts blowing up. And I'm like, what's that? So I look down, and here's this guy calling me, and I'm like, it's a Saturday. He rarely calls me during the week. This must be something. So I
Mhm.
excused myself, stepped out of the room. He's like, hey, you got a minute to talk? I say, yeah, sure. What's up? And then he shared with me his son had died by suicide. And he's like, John, I get if you don't want to talk about this. He said, but honestly, you're the only person I know who lost a child to suicide. And I was hoping you might be able to help me. And of course I would. Bless you. You gotta do the right thing. And so we probably talked for 45 minutes or an hour. And at that time, your brain goes back to that incident, and you start running things through your head, and what would have been helpful, for me, what would have been helpful for my kids, what would have been helpful for my wife, and all those things. And that's where I went. I said, I'm just sharing this with you. This is what we did. That doesn't mean it's the right medicine for you all, but it's you're asking me, and this is I've never studied this, but this is anecdotally, this is what kind of helped us.
Yeah.
And I said,
At
um,
least gave him a place to start.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
something.
So,
Yeah.
so I gave him some ideas for him, which were different than the ideas for his wife, which were different than his ideas for his kids.
Right.
And I said, here's what we're going to do. I am not going to talk to you tomorrow because it's a Sunday, and I said you are going to be inundated with calls from people you haven't heard from, and it's more important for you to hear all those voices than to hear my voice again. And I said, but what I will do is I will call you on Monday. So early Monday afternoon, I reached out to him. I said, I know it's a silly question, but how's it going?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I get it. I get it. So we got to talk, and I said, tell me, what more can I do for you? How can I help? And he's like, man, you've done enough already. What do you mean? He said, my kids have already connected. They got appointment. My wife's connected, got appointment. I connected, and I got an appointment.
Oh,
So, that was probably the first big one, that I dealt with, because that was close because he's a friend of mine,
yeah.
and no one ever wants to see family or friends be in that predicament.
No.
So so it's essentially what I'm trying to get to here, Robin, is um, eventually, in my research, what I saw was there were programs out there for different audiences.
Mhm.
Some really good post-vention programs out there for the military. There's
Yeah.
some really good post-vention programs out there for dentists, for veterinarians,
Interesting.
police officers. Um, but I really didn't see anything specific to construction. And what I did was more general. And what I found in most of those programs that I just mentioned, they always approached it from a three-phase uh, um, um, layout. They looked at the short term, they looked at the midterm, and they looked at the long term.
Mhm.
So I want to qualify what I'm saying here. It's not that I don't have interest in the midterm or long term, because I realize that's a part of the healing process.
Sure.
But honestly, this is the example I always use with people. I had no one on March the 24th of 2017 to turn to, nor did my children, nor did my wife.
Mm.
I don't want someone to be in that predicament again.
Yeah.
So I call it the first 48. Those first 48 hours, how
Mhm.
can we deliver acute help to those individuals? I'm not even saying the entire phase of the short term. I'm talking about the first 48. Some would say, depending on the literature, the short term can be 3 to 6 months, there's also everybody's got different ideas about this.
Sure.
But I'm talking about the first 48 after the incident, whether it was an attempt or it was an actual death. What do we do with all those people left behind?
Yeah.
And how do we better direct them to resources that are helpful? Because here's the example I tell people. When that happened, what it felt like to me was someone had just taken me in a boat with two concrete blocks and dropped me off in the middle of the lake where I can't see land. And
Mhm.
5 minutes later, another boat came by. Instead of throwing life preservers to me, they started throwing me 100-pound sacks of potatoes. So that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
No one should have to feel like that. And so, um, as I mentioned, we closed the survey in early December. I crunched the data, doing the coding and the categorizing of the comments and all those kinds of things, and the stats and all that. Um, so that level, what I would say, level one's finished for now. My next level is to do probably upwards of 15 one-on-one interviews. Uh,
Mm.
not too much different than like what you're doing here. Where I'll have the recording on and probably a transcriber on too, because I hate typing.
Mhm.
Um, but so let me dig into those 64 people. Um, these people across a wide range, and so I could put them in buckets, of course. So I have in there um, construction safety people, because they're the ones typically having to deal with this. I have some union reps in there that kind of do that on the other side of the table. Um, I have people who are lost survivors. I have people in there who are temp survivors.
Mm.
I have police, officers. I have firefighters. I have the coroner. Um, I have researchers. So researchers from a couple different camps. Researchers who have studied and done work in the prevention and intervention area, and researchers who did work in the postvention area. And most of these, what they have in common is a lot of them have either published work, peer-reviewed work, or they've created programs.
Mhm.
And so there's no sense in me recreating the wheel.
Right.
Um, but I think this is a unique focus, because it is postvention. As I mentioned earlier, there's not a lot for construction out there, and I'm not trying to boil the ocean. I'm trying to help those people who are in dire straits in
Yeah.
those first 48 hours, because it takes that about that long, in my opinion, to finally get your head somewhere back in the game again, because your head is just swimming when something like this happens.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, I mean, I mean, it's such a tragedy that you experienced it, but to hear you say what was created out of your experience, you know what what people, what feels like a lifeline for people, what they're experiencing in that time frame. And I'm sure that was a really an important mindset in your development of it, because you've walked the walk,
Well, I tell you,
unfortunately.
yeah, I tell you, so this after that happened, it pushed me in a direction, of doing suicide prevention and intervention.
Mhm.
Um, and you always have people, when you speak in front of a group, who won't speak in front of the group, with a question, but they'll come up, they line up afterwards, right? Because it's too
Right.
intimate or whatever.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, Robin, some of those are the best conversations I've ever had. Whether it's on opioid misuse or whether it's on suicide. I had a young man come up to me, a couple of years ago after I did a presentation on opioid misuse, and like 2 years earlier, I had done one on suicide prevention. And he came up to me, and typically they don't let people from the crowd on stage, but he said, I really need to talk to him. So he came up, and
Uh-huh.
I saw him, and I gave him a nod. Yes, I recognized the
Uh-huh.
man. And he said, "Hey man, I just wanted to share this with you." He said, "I just wanted to let you know what you taught me 2 years ago.
Mm.
I just used last month, and it saved an apprentice's life. I thought you should know that."
Ah,
And I
yeah.
said, "I do need to know that.
Yeah.
And here's why. This is a father. I need to know that this work has positive results."
Yeah.
Because ultimately, a story like that shows me that my son didn't die in vain.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the saving of one life is
Yep. Yeah. So,
worth it
to
all.
share with you a little deeper, I, you know, I have people not just from the United States, I got them from Canada, Australia, Scotland, England. It's an eclectic mix of people, who were surveyed. Some of them were so kind to, sit down and have a Zoom before, I sent the survey out, just to,
Mm.
you know, kind of get a, better bearings on where they were coming from. One young lady was like, John, that's not my wheelhouse. Suicide prevention. I said, yeah. This young lady a year ago in November was on an international webinar um, to speak to suicide, and it was called "Why Men Die by Suicide." And she's from Scotland. I thought to myself, why not listen to it? There might be some nuggets in there that well, maybe they know something we don't know. Better yet, hey, maybe they die for different reasons than our people do,
Mhm.
And this young lady did a really nice job. So much so, Robin, typically when I'm on webinars, I rarely take notes. I took 2.5 pages of notes. Well, she shared with us at the very end that, oh, by the way, I'm defending my doctoral dissertation. Thanks for being my guinea pigs.
Ah, nice.
So we've
Win-win.
kind yeah, yeah, yeah. So we've kind of stayed in contact. I write her, she writes me every 4 or 5 months or whatever. So finally, when I was ready to launch the survey, she's like, that's not my wheelhouse. I said, wait a minute now. More and more I read about postvention. They say a good postvention program is a good prevention program. She's like, all right, you got me. So she said, would you mind me sending you some other people who I think are closer to this? So she sent me a gentleman's name from the London area that works in the post-vention space for construction industry, and then another man in Scotland. And he's already, he lost his son to suicide a couple of years ago, and he's already started a program over there where they're training people up for peer support, you know I'm like, I got to find out more about that because you know, I know you're a fan of peer support, and more of the stuff that's coming out, the research that's coming out saying a peer-to-peer connection is really, having some really good and unique results, different than that of a peer to professional, because that power differential, right?
Right, of
And
course.
so um, yeah, so I feel blessed. The gentleman from Scotland actually said, hey, we're running a class in June. You want to come over? Yeah, I think I do. I want to
Yeah.
see this. I want to see firsthand how this plays out. Because my third stage, so my second phase is the interviews.
Mhm.
And then I'll code those interviews and categorize the information, the data. And then my third phase, I think I'm going to do um, a focus group
Ah, yeah.
and let that focus group kind of guide what the training might look like. You know,
Mhm.
I'm not trying to be an 8 hour mental health first aid. I think this is something in my mind. I look at it almost like a QPR training, where you could probably do it somewhere between 60 and 120 minutes. I don't know that because I got to see some stuff. I mean, some of these people I reached out to are incredibly nice. There's
Mhm.
a lady in the DC area that does the suicide prevention for the military. The acronym is TAPS. Her
Mhm.
name is Carla,
Mhm.
and that program's been in play for a while. I mean, she basically did her doctoral dissertation as a proof of concept of that program, and for lack of better words, and I reached out to her and talked to her on a phone call, and she's like, when you're ready for an interview, just give me a call and we'll set up the time. Like, this is wonderful because
It is.
the last thing I want to do is why, again, I hate, using a tired old saying, but why
Right,
recreate the wheel when it's
absolutely.
already here? And then just a month ago, someone not 40 miles away from here, I think I was sharing, some of that information earlier. She works in a suicide prevention program for police officers and
Mhm.
first responders,
Mhm.
um, and she's created a program. Well, again, there's got to be
Yeah.
tidbits from that there's no sense in we have to go back and redo this stuff. So,
I find that there's this beautiful sense of shared mission,
yep,
of this collaboration of how do we all come together and learn from each other and really help this movement move forward. It's about serving people and helping people
it
and
is,
saving
really
people
is. And
ultimately.
And you learn things that aren't in the mainstream always. One of the researchers I've talked to, she's come forward and said, "Hey, we should keep spending more and more money on prevention, and the suicides keep going up. We're not doing something right. We need to step back and take a look at this." And I think it gets to what you were saying before we got on, the recording, and that is, you're not about being reactive. Um, you want to be proactive, and so how do we do that? And so she doesn't even refer to it as prevention. She refers to it as inoculation, inoculating people.
Yes.
So
Love
she's
it.
going to definitely be one of the people I interview, because it's just,
So true.
somebody invited me to a webinar for a community group that does suicide prevention on the east side over in Illinois last month, and I sat in on it. And they said, "Well, you might want to read this person's writings about the topic." And I think she's the first one that really's come out in pen and paper and said, "Hey, this stuff's not working. We need to take a different, direction on this." And this is the kind of person I want to talk to, because
Thank goodness.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. I mean, the
So
statistics don't lie. And it's
yeah,
like, the experiences that everyone's having, yeah, you can't keep doing the same thing if
right,
it's thinking outside the box. How do we be creative? How do we
right,
learn and be agile in this space to really to create programs and systems that are going to be effective? Yeah. It's interesting as you've been talking, and I just, what struck me in all of this, whether it's the peer support work we do or what you're talking about, helping people in that first 48 hours, regardless, it all boils down to this human connection,
yep,
of
yep,
being present with people through and offering this like lifeline of hope,
right,
and
yep,
you just can't say enough the importance of that. Um, it just goes so far, and it's not like this is going to take millions of dollars to do. It's really, and I do think that in this industry, what I find very much like you are, people are, they have huge hearts. They care
right,
deeply for one another. No one wants this to happen to anyone's family or friend or colleague or
right,
person in their union, their brotherhood, their sisterhood. No one wants it, because it's just so tragic and unnecessary. And so,
right.
um, yeah,
Well, I tell you, it's been very interesting, um, because every time you meet someone, they knew two or three others, and some of the stuff has just been really, really, um, moving for me. There's a group out of the University of Washington up in the Northwest, that has done some really good work with regards to suicide prevention. And if you haven't seen their 60-minute training for suicide prevention in the construction industry, that's another link I will give you, and hopefully you'll
okay,
share. It's free.
okay.
My doctorate is in education, so I am a stickler for, you know, delivering, and these
This
people
does it.
delivered. Oh my goodness, it's good. It's good.
Okay. Thank you so much. I mean, that's one thing that I want these podcasts to do is to really, inspire people and empower people to find these resources because again, together, there's so much out there. If
Right,
you can connect people to it. And I'm like you. I'm always trying to learn and grow and connect others. And
right.
so thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
again, I work in all three of those spaces. I do, you know, work for AFSP with regards to programs like Talk Saves Lives. To me, that's a prevention program. When I talk to contractors or unions or apprenticeship schools and they want suicide prevention, typically it's it's framed as suicide prevention, but I deliver QPR training, question, persuade, refer. I, I think that's suicide intervention training personally, because you see signs and you know what to
Right.
do, right?
Exactly.
And that, and you take those kinds of courses and you learn from them, because, it really instilled in me the importance, not just the difference, but the importance of a warm handoff versus a cold handoff. And
Right.
too often, um, we're sending people to, links that are dead, or
Right.
phone numbers that,
No one calls
that,
back.
or they
Mhm.
don't take new patients. I often, when I speak to groups, especially people who are doing peer support, I said the 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 sin is if you tell someone to do something, you haven't done it yourself. So if you tell them to call XYZ, make
Mhm.
sure you've called them,
Right.
to know what they're about to go through, or if that even exists anymore. I've had that, and so it to me is something that is really important. And I think we've got those bases covered, under prevention and intervention. And I think it's time we really do something about postvention, and that's where my heart is. I really would love to have something published in a peer reviewed journal late this year, early next year, and hopefully, out of the focus group, um, at least come up with a train the trainer, because
Yeah.
it'd be for someone like yourself. I'm not saying you're going to make your life's work out of this one thing. Not, you said it earlier, it's another tool in your toolbox. And we are blessed in St. Louis here to have a group, the construction laborers, that have a very progressive, innovative peer support program called the LEAN program.
Mm-hmm.
LEAN stands for Laborers Escaping Adversity Now.
Hmm.
Um, they pulled, this is really cool, Robin. They pulled two journey level workers out of the field, with like 15, 20 plus years experience out of the field, but they had to have at least 5 years of sobriety. And we sent them through the Missouri Certified Peer Specialist Program. And then we sent them through the community college's Certified Community Health Worker Program. And then they've taken other trainings. And essentially, they are on call 24/7, 365. And well, with the Joint Labor Management health care funds in the state of Missouri, they are not typically on the individual. They're on that individual and his or her family. So they're dealing with kids that are 16, with anxiety issues, to, maybe, a spouse with a drinking issue, to, the member themselves, that may be having some, depression or something, or drug misuse because the doctor gave them opioids. That's one of the biggest, issues that we face in this industry, is that um, we only get paid for when we work.
Right.
So if you're the breadwinner, you have to find ways to show up for work, right?
Hmm.
And if it was a white collar job, you could maybe get away with going to 6 weeks of physical therapy. Not in a blue collar job. They got to be there. They got to show up. So the only way you can show up is mask that pain. And often, instead of going through 6 weeks of therapy, they go to the opioid bottle. And
Yeah.
to no fault of their own, it's part of the industry. We need to figure this out, and because anyone who thinks that opioid misuse is not a mental health issue and it's not potential for suicide, they are sadly mistaken. These
Hmm.
things are all
Yeah.
intertwined,
Yep.
and
Absolutely.
um, sadly, uh, it, this industry. I looked at the data just recently. I think the last data shows that 89% of the industry is male, and almost 11% is female now, which is significantly different. Just like 3 years ago, it was like 92 and 8. So we're making some strides, which is good. So now you've got a new group of people that have their own challenges. If you're a mother, and
Right.
you got to worry about your kids getting home from school, and you got to stay late because there's a concrete pour. These are things that, the industry's got to come to grips with, and it's all that work-life balance that, people don't want to hear about, but you need to, because we're not going to fix this
Mm.
As one person said to me, and I'm sure you've heard this before, we're not going to yoga our way out of this situation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, my goodness, I love your passion and your energy, John, and just all that you're, where you've been and where you are and where you're going. What a gift to the industry you are and to all of us working in this space of trying to make a difference. So thank you so much. If you, just as we kind of think about wrapping up our time together,
Okay.
if you could give somebody in our audience that's listening, um, you know, just one nugget of advice of how to, let's just say they're a leader or maybe they're an apprentice or a journeyman in their organization, whatever they do, what do you think would be one thing that they could do to start taking a baby step toward creating that cultural shift?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, I would not leave it to just Googling, mental health in the construction industry. I mean, there are some very focused websites touching on the issues of mental health, opioid misuse, and suicide prevention. Um, it's work I do every day of the week. So much so that I spend 3 hours every Sunday morning putting a blog together. And
Okay.
so
So
it's a
maybe the
weekly.
step could be they start following you.
Um, if they go to that blog, they'll find plenty of topics that popped up during the week that are related to work and mental health.
Okay.
And of course, they dig deeper in the website. They can certainly find some of the stuff that we do beyond just mental health in the construction industry. We do some resilience training and things of that nature as well. So I would highly recommend that the first step would be to expose yourself to something in the privacy of your own office or own home. Um, because some people, because of the stigma, they don't want to be waving a red flag, so um, learn from that situation and see where that can take you. As I said earlier, I'll send you some links that are along those lines that could help people out.
That'd be
Whether um, it's the micro learning from the Department of Labor, or it's the 1 hour program from the University of Washington on suicide in construction industry. You'll find that it's very it would be highly unusual that someone like yourself, myself, you mentioned Vince earlier, that would just leave people out there searching blindly for this stuff. There are so many resources, and if you just go to one of those micro learning units for the Department of Labor, they have so many resources in there. It might be that person's first foray into it. That may be enough, to get them moving in the right direction. Um, because the fact is that we're trying to get organization, agencies like OSHA to um, maybe expand their thought on the focus 4 to a focus 5, and including mental health. Right? Wouldn't that be
right.
huge?
Oh,
But we
yes.
need we need more soldiers to weigh in on this stuff, right? And the
Champions.
more awareness we create, the better chance we have of doing something like that. Um, but as I said earlier, um, I would say this this movement's at least in the world I live in, it's been going on at least since 2016. Seriously, um, and I got to tell you, we've come a long way. But is it perfect? No. Are we done? By no means. By no means. Because I'm a firm believer if we can get to free apprentice classes and apprenticeship classes and I'm not saying we got to be there every time they're in school, but maybe once a year, do a 1 hour class on mental health in the industry. By the time they journey out, this is second nature to them.
Yeah.
And I think talked off the air about this earlier. My view is 7 years from now, those apprentices today are going to be the
Right.
four people and the superintendents of tomorrow. So why not take advantage of that opportunity? Because first off, the younger generation is more open to this. My generation, we were told to poo-poo this stuff, to be quiet and all that kind of stuff. I often get challenged when I'm talking to some of the students and apprentices. I'll show charts up there, that the younger age group, the 18-25, has more concerns of reported more concerns about mental health issues than people my age. I'm 66. Um, and so, some of the more intuitive ones say, yeah, but that might be because you guys were told to, not talk about it,
Oh,
and we're
exactly.
more open about it. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of that in there as well. So I think the more we talk about it, the less it remains in silence, and the less it remains in silence, the less it becomes stigma. As I've told a number of groups, I didn't like much about COVID. I lost 5 friends to COVID. But the one good thing that came out of COVID, in my opinion, is that I don't think I know one family in the United States of America that mental health wasn't put squarely on their dinner table.
Absolutely.
Guess what that did for us, Robin? It gave us permission to talk.
Exactly. Because we collectively all experienced it together.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Out open the door. I 100% agree with you. Yeah.
yep.
It was the gift we got
Yep.
out of COVID. But my hope is that we don't shift back into autopilot, because that's one thing I'm kind of seeing is that, it's like, okay, the further we get from that, we start to kind of go back to old ways of thinking, and
Right.
so my hope is that we continue this conversation by having conversations like this. And you're right, talking about you sharing your story, the power of stories, of your lived experiences is,
Right.
it
I
connects
think
us all.
I honestly believe the movement that I see is towards peer support. And so I really appreciate the work you're doing, and we'll do some follow up
Yeah.
because I think this is key. Um, because as I have talked to groups, who would rather talk to a woman than another woman? Who would rather talk to a black person than another black person? Who would rather talk to a carpenter than another carpenter
Right.
or iron worker or whatever?
People I'm in the trenches with. Yep.
Right,
That working
right.
side by
So
side. Yep.
and more data is coming out showing that this is working. So it's just not somebody pull this out of the air and all those kinds of things. So I think we're in some good space with some really good momentum. I think in St. Louis we recently got a project approved um, to do a pilot of the MATES program, which is a
Oh,
suicide
yeah.
prevention program down in
From Australia.
Australia.
Yes, I
Yep.
heard someone
So
on
we're
that.
gonna we're gonna do a pilot study with a couple select contractors. I think one of the contractors is in St. Louis and one is up in Iowa somewhere. And so see how that works. Because the lean program I talked about, that's more of a centralized. There's 2 people doing it. But the MATES program, that's more decentralized. It
Right.
makes everybody kind of a player, if they want to be one. Right.
Yeah. That's kind of how ours is. Yeah. You
Yep.
volunteer.
Yep.
And it elevates just average people to be able to,
Right.
be peer supporters. So,
But like with peers, as with mentors, we have to do it in a measured way,
yes.
because if we rush into it and we don't have guardrails, we
Right.
could take 2 steps forward and 10 steps backwards, and we don't
Right.
want to do that. We,
No.
we want to make sure we got it right. We're not going to have it perfect, but we want to make sure we got it
We're
right.
moving in the right direction.
Yeah,
And I thank you,
no
John.
doubt.
How can people reach out to you, contact you if they want to connect with you, or your website,
Sure.
or some of the things you've talked about? How can they reach you?
is there an opportunity to put something in
Yeah.
writing at the end of your, let me do it that way. I think it's too
Okay.
tough for people to grab a
Okay.
pen and write this stuff down.
Absolutely.
So I'll
Yeah.
give you my email address as well as my cell number, and they can text me or
Okay.
send me
Very
an
good.
email.
We'll
Um,
include that. Yes.
yeah,
In the,
I would appreciate that.
absolutely. John, thank you so much. This has been just a lovely conversation that could go on for hours.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love it. Yeah, it's inspiring talking to like-minded people,
Yep.
like yourself, and also just to learn about all that you're doing in this space.
Well, there, none of this is just John. I've got a lot of good support. Um, Obviously, a great wife, a great family, and that family goes into the industry. That I work in. I've been
But you're
blessed.
sharing your wisdom and your insight and the things you've learned and paying it forward and
Yep,
that's beautiful. So,
yep.
yeah, so thank you so much for being here. So
Thank you. I
appreciated.
appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we are so happy that you joined us today. Um, the Mindful Momentum podcast is here to inspire and empower your journey toward a mindful life. Certainly, you're welcome to like, comment, subscribe, share, contact me at mindful-momentum.com or at robin at mindful-momentum.com. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.